They say some stories don't start with a gunshot or a wedding kiss, but with silence. A long, wind-whipped silence hanging over the scrubland like smoke after a bonfire. That was how the tale of Callum Briggs and Clara Bellamy was remembered around these parts. Not for the blood spilled, though there was some. Not even for the love lost, though it nearly was. But for the silence between them, and how it finally broke. Petition Flats sat on the edge of nowhere, a blistered patch of dirt bordered by red mesas and bad memories. Folks said the sun out here could strip a man down to the bone and bleach the soul out of whatever was left. Callum Briggs knew that better than most. Once, long ago, he had a name that folks whispered with a mix of awe and fear, the Grey Ghost. A former cavalry scout turned gun for hire, his legend was stitched into the seams of old Union war maps and outlaw wanted posters. But that was another life. Now he kept to his ranch on the outskirts of town, where even the crows seemed to fly around instead of over. He didn't drink, didn't gamble, didn't visit the saloon or the church. His horses were the only living things he spoke to regular. Even they had learned not to expect too many words. Then, after 2 years of stillness, she came back. Clara Bellamy arrived on the morning stage from Tucson, dressed in a widow's black bonnet and leading a small boy by the hand, dark-haired, dark-eyed, and quiet as the grave. She didn't look at anyone as she stepped off that coach, but everyone looked at her. They remembered the scandal, the marriage, the disappearance, the ring left behind in the dust. No one said anything. Not even old man Graves, whose job it was to welcome visitors with a handshake and a spit of tobacco. But eyes watched, whispered, wondered. Clara walked straight down the center of Main Street, her spine as stiff as a preacher's rod, and past the saloon, the general store, and the sheriff's office without pause. She took up residence in the crumbling cabin just north of the church, the one that used to belong to her father, who died a year past. She fixed the door, patched the windows, and sent the boy to school without ever saying his name. Some said she'd come back to die. Others said revenge. But nobody, not even Callum, guessed the truth. Not yet. The first time he saw her again, she was kneeling beside a dry creek bed, gathering pebbles into a leather satchel. Her bonnet lay beside her, and the wind teased loose strands of her honey-colored hair across her cheek. The boy stood a few feet behind, watching a horned lizard crawl across the red dirt. Callum had been riding fence that day, repairing a break where coyotes had dug under. When he rounded the bend and spotted her, he froze. The horse whinnied. She looked up. Neither spoke. The space between them felt like a canyon, wide, echoing, and full of unsaid things. He tipped his hat. She gave the faintest nod. Then she returned to her pebbles. That night, Callum sat alone by the fireplace, the orange glow dancing in his hollow eyes. The ring was still in the drawer beside his bed, still shining beneath dust. The next few weeks passed like slow molasses. Clara took to teaching school again, just as she had before. The children adored her. Even Sheriff Tomes said he was glad to have someone with a spine in the classroom again. The boy, his name, they eventually learned, was Elijah, rarely spoke. But he watched everything, especially Callum. When the old rancher came into town to collect supplies, the boy would linger near the blacksmith or the water trough, just close enough to see but not be seen. It was a strange tension, like thunder rumbling in the far hills. Then the fire happened. It was past midnight when the cabin lit up like dry brush struck by lightning. Flames roared through the walls like a banshee's cry, licking up toward the heavens with ferocious hunger. Callum was up mending tack when he saw the glow on the horizon. He saddled his gelding and rode hard, the desert wind burning his face. By the time he arrived, half the roof had collapsed. But Clara wasn't screaming. She was inside, trapped beneath a beam, coughing and bleeding, her eyes wild with panic. The boy, Callum, dove through the smoke like a man already dead. Found Elijah curled beneath a table, his arm burned and shaking. He threw the child over his shoulder, then hauled Clara out second. They all collapsed in the dirt as the flames crackled behind them. He didn't say a word. Neither did she. Not then. But when Elijah opened his eyes and saw the man who'd saved him, he whispered, "Pa." Word spread fast. "Pa," the townsfolk whispered. "That's Callum's boy." Clara offered no answers. Neither did Callum. But that single word hung in the air heavier than gunpowder. 3 days later, Callum rode into town with a wagon and stopped outside Clara's burnt-out cabin. He didn't dismount. Didn't say much. You and the boy can come out to the ranch, till you figure what's next. She studied him. Her face was pale, her hands wrapped in bandages. We're fine. He shifted in the saddle. You're not. Then she said something that hit like a nail through his boot. We were never fine, Callum. Not then. Not now. He nodded once. Still. Offer stands. And he rode away. That night, after the boy wept himself to sleep on a borrowed cot at the church, Clara stared at the horizon where the ranch sat hidden among juniper trees. She remembered the last time she'd ridden out there, how she'd watched him dig fence posts in silence, how she'd cried into her pillow at night when he wouldn't touch her or speak of his past. She remembered the feel of his hand the night she finally walked out, rough, calloused, trembling as he reached for her, and failed. But she also remembered the way he'd looked in the firelight, arms burned, eyes fierce, carrying his son like he was forged from iron. Maybe he was. The next morning, Clara packed a bundle and walked with Elijah toward the ranch. They say in Perdition Flats that no man ever fought harder than Callum Briggs, but not with bullets or fists. With silence. With sorrow. With a past he couldn't outrun, and a love he thought he'd lost for good. And when Clara Bellamy returned with fire in her eyes and a sun on her hip, the wind shifted in those canyons. The old-timers still say it. That's when the ghost came back to life. Clara Bellamy stepped across the weather-worn threshold of the Briggs ranch house with a heart heavy as saddle iron. The boy clung to her skate, peeking cautiously from behind as if the shadows inside might leap out and scold him. But it was no ghost that greeted them, only Callum, shirt sleeves rolled, chopping firewood in the yard. He looked up, nodded once. Room's ready. That was all he said. No questions. No apology. No welcome. Just as it had always been. The ranch sat on a bluff of wild grass and stone, far enough from town that the wind spoke louder than men. An old oak tree leaned by the porch like it, too, had grown tired of standing tall. The house itself was sturdy but silent, its wooden bones creaking only when the wind breathed through its cracks. Inside, Callum had prepared a small room off the kitchen. A handmade bed frame, washed linens, a quilt, patched but clean. Clara touched the fabric gently. She remembered stitching that very quilt, long ago, when she still believed marriage would be a kind of sanctuary. Elijah can sleep here, Callum said from the doorway. His eyes flicked to the boy, then to her. You take my room. I'll bunk in the loft. She turned slowly. You don't have to do this. I know. The days that followed were quiet but taut, like a banjo string wound too tight. Clara cleaned the old house with swift precision, swept dust from corners that hadn't seen light in years, and cooked meals with hands that hadn't forgotten their rhythm. Elijah, still healing from the fire, stayed close, quiet and watchful. And Callum, he worked the ranch like always. Fencing, branding, riding the perimeter before dawn and again at dusk. But now there were moments, small ones, where he lingered just a little longer near the boy, where he watched Clara with something unreadable in his eyes. One night, as rain tapped the tin roof and thunder rolled far off across the mesa, Clara found herself awake by the kitchen stove, staring into the flame. She didn't hear him approach. You always did like the fire, Callum said quietly. She turned. It's the only thing that talks back out here. He almost smiled. Almost. Then he poured 2 cups of black coffee and handed her one. His hands were cracked, fingertips raw from the fence wire. Why'd you really come back, Clara? She took a slow sip. I told myself it was for the land. For Elijah. But that's not the whole truth. He waited. I had nowhere else to go, she whispered. Nowhere that felt like it remembered me. Callum stayed into his cup like it might offer answers. You never stopped haunting this place, even when you were gone. She looked up sharply. Then why didn't you come for me? He breathed through his nose. Because I knew I wasn't the man you needed. A pause. And maybe I still ain't. The next morning brought trouble. A rider came from town, Sheriff Tomes, hat in hand and sweat beading on his brow. McCord sniffing around, he muttered to Callum at the gate. Claims Clara's land borders his. Says he's got the deed to prove it. That land was her father's, Callum said, voice flat. McCord don't care. He's buying up half the territory and bullying folks off the rest. Burned 2 shacks near Coyote Gulch last month. Callum's jaw tightened. He the one torched Clara's place. Sheriff shrugged. Can't prove it, but I wouldn't put it past him. Callum glanced toward the house, where Clara stood behind the curtains, Elijah at her hip. She ain't moving again, he said, and turned back toward the fields. Later that day, Clara found a note nailed to the porch post. It read, "This land ain't yours. Take your boy and go. Or next time, we don't miss." There was no signature, just a smear of tobacco spit beneath the words. She tore it down with shaking hands. Callum said nothing when he saw the note. He simply hitched his horse and rode off toward town, shotgun strapped across his back. He returned that evening with a cracked lip, bruised knuckles, and a bloody shirt. "Elijah asleep?" he asked. Clara nodded, eyes wide. "What did you do?" "Just reminded a few of McCord's boys that this ain't open range. You'll get yourself killed." He sat heavily by the fire. "Not before I fix what I broke." The next few days passed with tension thick as creek mud. Clara began to see something in Callum's face, something that hadn't been there before. Not regret, not guilt, but resolve. He built a new fence around the house, reinforced the barn, moved his rifle out of the trunk and into a rack near the front door. Elijah, once shy and silent, began to trail after Callum like a shadow. They rode together at dawn, gathered kindling together in the late sun. One night, the boy even fell asleep on Callum's lap by the fire, fingers curled in his shirt. Clara saw it all, and though she said little, her eyes betrayed the storm within. One evening, she entered the barn to find Callum brushing down his horse in silence. "I never told you why I left," she said. "He didn't turn. Didn't reckon you needed to. But you deserve to hear it." Silence stretched. Then she spoke, her voice low and fierce. "You built walls I couldn't climb. I tried. God knows I tried. But you shut me out. You spoke to your saddle more than you ever spoke to me. And when I found out I was carrying Elijah..." Callum froze. Slowly, he turned. "I was terrified. Not of the child. Of what kind of father you'd be. I didn't want him growing up in silence." Callum's voice cracked. "You should have told me." "I know." She stepped closer. "But I didn't come back just because I was lost. I came back because part of me believed you were still in there, that the man I married wasn't dead, just buried." Callum looked at her then, really looked, and what she saw wasn't stone or shadow. It was pain. And longing. "I wanted to be better," he whispered, "but I didn't know how." Clara took his hand. "Then learn now. With us." That night, as a blood moon rose over the desert, Clara sat beside Callum on the porch. Elijah snored softly in the next room, and coyotes howled in the distance. For the first time in years, Callum spoke without weight in his throat. "I used to dream about riding off into the hills, never coming back. But now, I think I'd rather stay. Build something that don't vanish in smoke." She leaned against him. "Then we build it. Together. They say the desert doesn't forget. Not the storms, not the sins, and certainly not the souls that tried to outrun themselves." But that night at the Ghost Ranch, under a blood moon and a whispering wind, two lost hearts found their rhythm again. And in the silence, love began to speak. They say a man don't truly leave his past behind. He just learns to walk quieter around it. Weeks passed at the Briggs Ranch, each one chipping away the walls that had long divided Clara and Callum. The land healed under their hands. The silence softened. Elijah's laughter sometimes echoed between the barns, and Clara's voice began to sing again when she cooked by the stove. But peace, like spring rain in the desert, never stays long. Trouble rode in with the dust. Elias McCord was not a man used to hearing the word no. He stood taller than most, wore a coat stitched from Spanish leather, and spoke like a preacher who'd sold his sermons to the devil. He arrived at the ranch with 3 riders and a smack that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You've been squatting on Bellamy land long enough," he told Clara from horseback, a pistol slung low on his hip. "That property borders mine, and I intend to take what's owed." Callum stepped from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't wear a gun, didn't raise his voice. "She ain't moving," he said. "Not now. Not ever." McCord's gaze slid over to Elijah, who stood behind Clara gripping his skate. The man's smile widened. "Then I suppose we'll just have to convince you." That night, Callum dug through the cellar. Under a loose floorboard, wrapped in an old Union flag and buried beside a broken whiskey bottle, lay his past, a revolver with worn ivory grips, its barrel notched with 5 lines. The ghost's gun, they used to call it. He unwrapped the cloth slowly, like he was peeling open an old wound. Clara found him there, kneeling in the lantern's flicker. She didn't speak, just stood in the doorway and watched as he stared at the weapon like it might answer the questions he couldn't ask. "I thought I buried this," he said. "You buried who you used to be," she replied. "But that man, maybe parts of him, still belong to us." Callum closed the gun back in the cloth. "This ain't for revenge. It's for protection. For you. For Elijah." Clara stepped forward, her hand resting over his. "Then don't be afraid to use it." The following morning, Clara took Elijah to the bluff above the property and placed a tin can on a fence post. The rifle was too long for her shoulders now, but her aim was still true. She hadn't picked up a gun since her father died. But the memory came back. Breath steady, elbows tight, focus narrow. She fired, missed, then fired again. The can spun into the air. Behind her, Callum stood silently, arms crossed. "You shouldn't have to," he said. "I won't wait for men to fight for me anymore," she answered. He nodded. Pride stirred behind his eyes. That night, gunshots rang out beyond the corral. By the time Callum reached the barn, 3 horses lay dead. The 4th had been stabbed, its flank torn open. A warning. Callum stared down at the blood in the straw, then looked up at the stars. His jaw tightened like it might snap in half. He spent the rest of the night boarding windows and posting tripwire alarms through the brush. Elijah helped without question, laying wire, tying knots, lighting lamps. "You scared?" Callum asked. The boy nodded. "But not if you're here." As sunrise painted the sky in orange and ash, Sheriff Tomes rode out to the ranch, his face pale and taut. "I'm leaving town," he said flatly. "McCord's got half the deputies on his payroll. I can't protect you." Callum just stared. Tomes spat into the date. "You were a damn legend once. You still got that iron in your blood." Callum didn't answer. He didn't need to. Inside the house, Clara found something buried behind a false panel in the wall, a worn leather-bound journal with Callum's name scrolled inside. She sat by the hearth and read by candlelight, page after page filled with scrawled ink in blood-stained corners. Names, orders, regrets, a full account of the war on the Llano, the massacre Callum had never spoken of. She learned how he refused the final order, how he carried a wounded Comanche child 3 miles through enemy territory, how the army court-martialed him in secret, then burned the records. "I thought silence would save what was left of me," he wrote, "but it only made me forget who I was fighting for." When she closed the journal, her cheeks were wet. At noon the next day, McCord returned, this time with 6 riders, shotguns loaded. They didn't bother knocking. Callum met them in the yard. His revolver was strapped low on his hip, sun gleaming off the handle like it had been waiting years to shine again. "This your idea of a land claim?" he asked. McCord smiled, flashing gold teeth. "This is my idea of cleaning up the trash." The standoff was brief, but bloody. Callum drew first. 2 men dropped before the others blinked. The rest scattered like spooked quail, leaving McCord behind, face red with rage and gun trembling in his hand. But he didn't shoot. He didn't dare. "Next time," he spat, "you'd die on your knees." Callum raised the barrel. "Next time, you don't ride away." That night, Clara found Callum sitting by the fire, wiping blood from his boots. His eyes were glassy, distant. "I swore I wouldn't be that man again," he murmured. She knelt beside him. "Then don't be. Be this man, the one who stood for us." He looked at her then, and for the first time since they'd married, he let his defenses crumble. "I don't know if I can ever be enough." Clara leaned in. "You already are." They made love that night with the window open and the stars watching, and when Elijah called out in his sleep, Callum rose to tuck him in, brushing a hand over the boy's hair with fingers still trembling. By dawn, Clara was out mending the barn roof, hammer in hand and sleeves rolled high. Callum rode out to the eastern ridge, where vultures circled overhead and rustlers once hid in the brush. From the crest, he could see far into the valley, where dust plumes rose. McCord was coming again, but this time, Callum didn't ride back with fear in his gut. They say the ghost's gun sang again that week, but not for glory, nor for gold. It sang for a family reclaimed, for a home defended, for a second chance clawed from the jaws of regret. And as the wind carried the echoes across Perdition Flats, the old-timers knew the legend wasn't done yet. The reckoning was coming. He rode back with fire. They say when thunder rolls low over Red Mesa, it ain't the storm you're hearing. It's the ghosts of that final showdown. The day love stood tall with a gun in its hand. The sun hadn't risen, yet when Callum finished saddling the horses, he worked with quiet purpose, tightening buckles, checking the cinches, loading shells into his revolver with hands steady as iron. Across the yard, Clara stepped out with Elijah wrapped in a blanket. Her eyes were calm, fierce, like prairie fire before the wind hits. "They're coming," she said. "I know." He mounted his gelding. "I'll ride out and meet him at the Narrows. Can't let them get close to the house." "I'm coming with you." Callum paused. "Clara, I can shoot. I can ride. And I'm not hiding again." She handed Elijah the locket from around her neck. "You stay with Miss Tilda at the church till we come back. You hear me?" The boy nodded, tears in his eyes, but his chin didn't tremble. Callum reached down, pulled him into a fierce hug. "I'll see you soon, son." They rode hard toward Red Mesa, where sandstone cliffs narrowed the desert into a rocky choke point. It was the kind of land made for ambushes and for last stands. Wind howled through the canyons, dry and sharp, and vultures circled high overhead, as if they sensed the blood yet to spill. Callum dismounted near a limestone outcrop. He passed Clara a Winchester from the stool bag. "We'll make our stand here. High ground. Clear view." She scanned the cliffs, then nodded. They won't know what hit them. By mid-morning, dust trails curled along the horizon. McCord's riders, 10 strong, spread out across the flatland like carrion birds. McCord himself rode at the front, black duster flapping behind him, gold teeth glinting like a devil's grin. He raised his rifle and shouted, "Callum Briggs, this here's your last sunrise." Callum stood tall atop the ridge, framed against the blazing sky. His voice rang out like thunder. "Funny, I was about to say the same to you." The outlaws laughed. But laughter dies fast in the desert. Clara fired the first shot. A rider tumbled from his horse, his scream swallowed by the cliffs. Then Callum opened fire. The Mesa exploded in noise, gunshots cracking like lightning, horses screaming, dust erupting with every hit. Callum fired with the calm, brutal efficiency of a man who'd faced death too often to flinch. Clara's rifle cracked again and again. She moved like wind on water, fluid, focused, unwavering. One outlaw made it up the side path. Callum tackled him mid-charge, smashing his face into the rock, then spun and dropped another with a shot to the gut. Blood painted the sand. McCord scrambled for cover, dragging a wounded man by the collar. His smirk was gone. He fired twice, both wild, panicked. Callum stalked down from the ridge like a storm given shape. "This land ain't yours," he growled, "and it never was." McCord spat. "You think love makes you a hero, Ghost? You're just a relic in a world that forgot your name." Callum leveled his gun, then let it remember this. But just as he pulled the hammer back, McCord lunged with a hidden derringer, grinning as he aimed point-blank at Clara. A shot rang out. McCord froze. He looked down. Blood blossomed from his chest. He turned, confused, and saw Clara lowering her pistol, breath shaking, eyes full of tears. "You never should have come near my family," she whispered. McCord collapsed into the dust. It was over. The canyon went still. Buzzards circled above, and the wind carried off the last echoes of violence. Callum walked over, took Clara's shaking hand, and pulled her close. She buried her face in his chest, and for a moment, there was nothing but breath and heartbeat. "You all right?" he murmured. She looked up. "I didn't think I had that in me." "You always did," he said. "You just needed a reason." They rode back into Perdition Flats before sundown. Townsfolk emerged from behind doors and shutters, eyes wide, mouths open. Elijah ran from the chapel, arms outstretched. Clara dismounted first and dropped to her knees as he crashed into her, sobbing. Callum stood tall, dust-covered and blooded, but alive. Sheriff Tomes returned 2 days later, took one look at McCord's lifeless gang hauled behind mules, and just said, "Well, I'll be damned." Callum offered no explanation. Clara gave no statement. They owed no one nothing. The ranch flourished after that. With McCord gone, Clara's land was secured. They rebuilt the barn, fixed the roof, and planted wildflowers by the fence line. Elijah grew stronger. He rode horses, worked cattle, and learned to read his mother's old books by lamplight. Some nights, Clara would sit on the porch, watching her son and her husband wrestle in the grass like boys born to the date. Her heart, once broken and afraid, had stitched itself whole again in the quiet rhythm of this hard, honest life. One evening, Callum took out the revolver and placed it in a box. He locked the box, then buried it. Clara watched him from the porch. "No more ghosts?" she asked. He walked back, dusting off his hands. "No, just stories now. They say love don't conquer all. That it bends, it breaks, it fades like dust under wagon wheels. But out in Perdition Flats, folks still whisper about the day a forgotten gunfighter and a fire-hearted bride turned a broken marriage into a legend. They carved their names into the canyon wind, and when the stars rise over Red Mesa, the wind still sings. That's how love won the West."